Tonight on Free Minds TV, stories about the British nanny state, also the U.S. Senate considering a tax on sugary soda, the Downsizer Dispatch, and a whole lot more.
And welcome to a brand new edition of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. It's episode 111, and it's Toby here with you.
And Nick.
All right, we have a lot to get into. We're going to be going over to the UK and their nanny statism, as well as getting into some more stories about those silly Canadians. But first, let's go over to Washington, D.C., where those foolish representatives are just thinking about some new ways that they can tax you and get money out of you. And what they're considering right now is a sin tax on sugary drinks such as sodas and sports drinks like Gatorades and energy drinks. Now, the proposed bill is looking for ways to pay for Obama's healthcare initiative to give everybody in the United States some health care. It's going to be costing over $1 trillion. And, well, they got to raise the billions and billions it takes. And one way they're going to be doing it is trying to put a 3-cent tax on every 12 ounces of sugary soft drink or otherwise sports drink that you imbibe. They're hoping to raise $24 billion over a 4-year period. And what this is adding up to is just a drop in the bucket. Now, for the $1 trillion we need. $24 billion, while it's a very, very large number, it's really not going to do all that much to raise the funds for this ginormous $1 trillion that's needed to ensure every single American or U.S. citizen here in the United States.
Well, I wouldn't
as well as some illegal aliens.
Right, I wouldn't be surprised to see them extend the tax to other foods that aren't considered very healthy for you, like meat or fatty foods or other sugary foods. I mean, ice cream isn't a beverage, but it contains a lot of sugar, so if they want to continue going down that route, it seems like they're probably not going to run into that much opposition, in my mind, on this soda tax, because it's 3 cents for every can of soda. I think a lot of people are just not going to be aware that this is going on, because certainly I don't think the mainstream media is going to be picking up on it in the way that we are.
Well, one thing that I think is interesting to point out is it is $24 billion. It's a lot of money. On the federal level, it's almost a drop in the bucket of what they really need. It's a lot of money that's coming out of consumer pockets, though. This is $24 billion that's going to be coming out of the pockets of people who actually may need the money. Now, I'm not trying to throw a huge blanket statement out there, but a lot of poor people imbibe in these sugary drinks, soda and such, a lot more than, say, the wealthier upper crust people do. So this is really another tax, much like cigarettes and alcohol taxes, it's really going to be hitting the poor the hardest. And while it might only be 3 cents here, 3 cents there, it's $24 billion over 4 years will be taken away from the consumer to pay for federal expenditures. Well, they say it's hopefully going to be for this medical program for everybody. They're also hoping to have some new federal taxes on wines, beers, and liquors, alcoholic beverages, more sin tax, and a whole lot more down the road. Because after all, this is only $24 billion, and they're looking for $1 trillion.
Right, and one has to keep in mind the fact is they say they're looking for $1 trillion now, but government programs, usually when they're first envisioned, politicians intentionally underestimate the cost to make the program sound better. So politicians might be selling this as it's only going to cost $1 trillion to insure every American, but it could easily end up costing more like $2 or $3 trillion. Who knows? I mean, government programs consistently overrun what they were predicted to run in terms of money. So even if they raised all of this money up front, they're probably going to be slapping even more new taxes on once they've already raised the $1 trillion initially.
And once again, it should be noted that fat people live shorter lives than young people. So if you're someone out there that's...
And thin people.
Yes, than fat people.
Old people also live shorter lives than young people.
Yeah, well, fat people die sooner than
well, they have less.
People. Well, the point is, the fatties who are drinking all this soda, who have to pay all these sin taxes on it, well, they're going to die earlier anyways, and they're not going to be collecting as much Social Security and other benefits from the government. So, you know, well, once again, just like the smokers, you're hurting the wrong people out there. Anyways, we must move on. Done picking on Washington for a little bit. Let's move over to the UK, where they're doing some awfully silly things. What's the latest, Nick?
Well, the Daily Mail's reporting that basically city councils around the UK are looking for environment volunteers who who are going to act as citizen snoopers, basically spying on their neighbors. These volunteers will report on people who litter, noisy neighbors, and even families who put their trash out on the wrong day, people who don't recycle everything that they're supposed to recycle. And the reason for this is supposedly, the claims being made by proponents of this program are that it's to help clean up the neighborhood. But largely it's so that they can issue fines which are up to £100 for a lot of these offenses, which is over $100 US. So it's quite a bit of money, and they don't really have to, I don't believe they're going to pay these people very much.
So wait,
and the people are as young as 7. They're recruiting even children to spy on their neighbors, not just busybodies who are maybe 55, don't have much going on with their career, have nothing else to do except spy on you. They're also going to be recruiting young children.
That's very disturbing.
It is, and it's what we've seen in more totalitarian societies, and generally speaking, free societies don't have these volunteer groups that spy on your neighbors.
When after September 11th, when all these right-wing talk shows were going off, say, go after terrorists, find the terrorists that's in your neighborhood and report them. And I heard this one caller calling to Bill O'Reilly, and he said, every day when we wake up, my kids, my 6-year-old and my 10-year-old, we go out to our neighbor's garbage and we go rifle through the entire thing looking for trash. That's what we do every single morning, looking for signs of terrorism. I was thinking how disgusting that is, but this is taking it a step further. You're not only looking for dangerous terrorists, you're looking for people who aren't recycling or sorting their trash properly. And once again, it's the government recruiting people, not some just crazy whack-out recruiting his kids. So it's definitely taking a step further. It's awfully scary, Nick, to think about what these 7-year-olds are going to turn out as people who have been trying to snitch out their neighbors their entire lives, starting at the age of as young as 7. I mean, what's this 35-year-old going to look like?
It's not a good sign. I mean, children were employed as spies in most communist countries when the Soviet bloc was still around, and they were used in Nazi Germany. Basically, every repressive regime relies on people spying on their neighbors and snitching, because regardless of how big a police apparatus you have, they just can't have enough police around to effectively control everybody's lives all the time. But if you never know who's spying on you, which of your friends or family you can trust, like you can't when you have spies like this running around, the fear of that keeps people in control, even if there isn't actually anybody watching them. So fear is a powerful tool, and while this is starting off in a way that might seem relatively benign, I mean, they're focusing on littering and things like that, likely the program will be expanded out. They've already got 9,000 volunteers who've already volunteered, and they're planning to expand that out. So they'll probably also expand the number of offenses they're looking out for.
Volunteer to snitch on your neighbor, and no, we're not talking about watching your neighbor break into someone else's house, but rifling through your neighbor's garbage and spying through their activities to look for things that they're doing bad. It sounds disgusting to me, but luckily, they also give us some humorous stories to talk about as well, so that we don't just have to be disgusted by the UK. We can also laugh at them, and that's what the next story is, Nick.
Yeah. Well, schools in the United Kingdom are banning regular ties that you actually have to tie, and they're largely switching over to clip-on ties just because they're worried about health and safety issues. Now, the article doesn't really mention any high-profile cases of children actually dying from getting their tie caught in something and choking to death, but the bureaucrats in the UK are concerned enough that they are, school by school, banning the use of actual regular ties.
Yeah, scary out there. What if your tie gets snagged up into some kind of piece of equipment and the kid's head gets ripped off? Wait, that's never happened in a school in the UK, at least that I could find. I actually did some perusing because I was looking at this story too, and I couldn't find any cases where any kids in the UK were killed in school due to their neckties. Also, this story did point out the fact that they're very concerned with if kids get to tie their own ties, that they might have different sized, what's the thing called at the top?
The knot?
The knot, yes. They might have different sized knots. So if they have clip-on ties, it would be uniform. I know that in some industries, such as police officers, they often have clip-on ties because they are often dealing with suspects, which may yank on them and could choke them. UK children, I don't think they're in that situation every day. You know what I say? Like, kids be kids. Let's stop micromanaging their lives. And you know what? If they get they fall down and get their tie ripped on a little bit, they'll learn pretty quickly. So, I mean, let a kid be a kid. We don't need to micromanage their lives. A nanny state in the UK, you're a laughingstock.
Yeah, I would point out that these uniforms that they're wearing are largely required. So for the most part, these kids are being forced to wear ties if they're a guy, and then they're being told, well, you can't wear a regular tie, you have to wear a clip-on, which is kind of chintzy and cheap, and you should probably learn to tie a regular tie.
All right. Well, we could pick on the nanny staters all day. They've always got more coming out. We'll probably bring you more next week, but it's time to focus in on what they're doing here in Washington and what the viewers can do for change. What's this week's Downsizer Dispatch, Nick?
Well, this week's Downsizer Dispatch is basically just an appeal for people to sign up at downsizerdc.org. They sent out their Downsizer Dispatch sort of pointing out all of the hurdles there are to achieving change in Washington through the traditional election process. A lot of people who are involved with Downsize DC, they'd like to get so-called good people elected to Congress. They'd like people in favor of smaller government elected. But you would need a really good candidate, a really great campaign, lots of money, and incumbents that are currently there, the big government incumbents, have a tremendous advantage by the fact that they're just incumbents, and they're rarely kicked out of office. So you probably have a better bet trying to steer the incumbents in office, put political pressure on them through an organization like downsizerdc.org. So I'd encourage people who are interested in changing the scene in Washington, but agree, or even if they disagree, that it's very difficult to get someone elected into Congress, at least take a look at Downsize DC. Even if you want to back campaigns, you can still have an influence on the incumbents who are there today. And I did want to point out, Downsize DC did announce there was a retraction from the story we brought you last week. Federal government money does not constitute a majority of state government spending. It does, however, constitute the single largest source. So the issue is pretty much the same, but there was that quick fact to correct.
All right, well, downsizerdc.org if you want to get involved. But for now, it's time for us to move on. When we come back, we are going to be talking about those silly Canadians, as well as some really good news about marijuana coming out. Not only some news coming from the Supreme Court, but we also have a story that states that marijuana may cure brain cancer. Stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV. Free Minds TV is brought to you in part by Life Productions for your basic and semi-pro video production needs. From full wedding and event coverage to DVD authoring and distributions, lifeproductions.com, that's lyfproductions.com.
Free Minds TV is brought to you by freekeen.com. Freekeen.com features audio, video, and blogs chronicling the transition to a voluntary society. Freekeen.com also has comments and discussion forums so you can be heard. Freekeen.com.
Hi, I'm Ian Freeman from Free Talk Live and freekeen.com, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV. It's Toby here with you.
And Nick?
I'd like to invite the viewers to log on to our website. freemindstv.com is the address. From there we have videos, the radio side, blogs, ways to help the show, and a whole lot more. Also ways that you can help out with PorkFest 2009. We will be there. We're hoping to be live. We could use your help though. Log on to freemindstv.com and click on the chip in button and help us broadcast live on June 25th from PorkFest 2009. It's the annual gathering of the Free State Project, and we'll be there regardless, but it would be nice to go live as well. Anyways, let's move on. I wanted to pick on the Canadians a little bit. Last week we brought you a ridiculous story about the Canadians fining a man for feeding a squirrel a peanut.
It was in Montreal, I should point out. So a lot of people there don't want to be Canadians, but they're Canadians for the moment.
Montrealians. Well, anyways, they're very silly, and they bring you a lot of silly, humorous stories. This one talking about a Montreal cop who cuffed and fined a student for not holding on to the handrail after she was exiting a subway. Bella Kosian was riding the escalator after getting off the subway at about 5:30 on a Tuesday evening when she heard a man come up behind her and say, "Hold on to the guardrail." Well, she had both her hands full and she didn't have any hands to put on the guardrail. And she said, "I don't have 3 hands and I really don't want to touch that disgusting handrail there." And he promptly threw the cuffs on her and dragged her behind a room, booked her, gave her a $450 fine for such. So, if you're ever in Canada, or I guess Montreal to be more specific, don't think that it's okay not to touch that nasty handrail on the escalator, or you may get a fine. Now, personally, Nick, I'd just like to state, I don't ever touch the handrails on an escalator. They're very dirty places.
Yeah, I've been to Montreal, and I've ridden on the escalators in the subway there, and I don't think I did either. I didn't know it was
It's a
something you could get
$450 fine.
For not
It
using the
seems like
handrail?
this would be a natural consequence if something happened to this lady. Let's say she didn't use the handrail and she fell down and hurt herself. Well, you know what? That's her bad. She'll next time maybe she'll use the handrail. But this time, well, it cost her $450. Probably a lot more than a slight little slip and fall might do. So, oh, silly, silly Canadians. You guys, sometimes you're a little bit foolish. This woman also did state, though, that she was wondering why the cops were going after her when they still haven't solved the crime of who stole her winter snow tires from her patio deck. So
It is a more important case to be focusing on.
but it doesn't raise the funds in the same manner, Nick. So anyway, still go after them. All right, let's get into some more serious news here. There is a new study coming out about marijuana, which is some great news for marijuana advocates. Now, a lot of people out there have known that there are many medicinal benefits of marijuana and THC more specifically, besides people just using it recreationally. But not a lot of studies have been done on it. Here in the United States, it's a Schedule I drug on the federal level, which means there's not really any way to run any real tests on it. There are, but it requires so many jumping through hoops that it's almost impossible to do. But in Spain, they are studying the drug, and on April 1st, they have found that the active chemical in marijuana promotes the death of brain cancer cells by essentially helping them feed upon themselves, researchers reported. So, some good news coming out about this, that they may actually find that cancer cells are forced to eat each other when they're exposed to certain products and chemicals in marijuana. Well, it would be really nice if we could jump on the bandwagon here and start studying this drug more often, see what other positive effects, other medicinal benefits we could have, but it's still a Schedule I drug on the federal level, which makes it very difficult. I also wanted to bring some other news about marijuana while we're on the same subject here before we start talking about it, having to do with the Supreme Court. Yes, the Supreme Court in Washington is now rejecting a case brought by the San Diego Board of Supervisors to try to restrict medical marijuana cards in California. The San Diego Board of Supervisors has stated that since marijuana is illegal on the federal level, even medical marijuana, that states and counties should not be forced to comply with certain rules and mandates handed down by the states governing marijuana. They should also feel that they should be able to go after marijuana patients for possessing the drug, since it's illegal on the federal level, and also not issue them marijuana ID cards. And the Supreme Court rejected the case. They said they don't want to hear it, which essentially states that states have the right to make marijuana legal for medical purposes without the federal government's blessing. So some great news coming out of this means that them local cops can't be busting people for using a medicine and arresting them on federal charges, which they shouldn't be doing anyways. And it also means that medical marijuana patients will be able to get their ID cards so they can get the medicine more readily than before.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that prohibition was never quite as hard on the user of alcohol as the drug war has been is that in many places there weren't local and state laws in place to back up prohibition. You actually had local police who would look the other way on people possessing or transporting alcohol because, well, there was no law in that state or that city saying that that was illegal. It was illegal on the federal level, and you could get in trouble with federal authorities. But of course, at the time, especially compared to today, there weren't very many federal authorities.
Right. So some great news. I also want to point out for the local viewers who are watching us here in New Hampshire, the medical marijuana bill is still in limbo at this time. It's passed the New Hampshire House and the New Hampshire Senate, but Governor Lynch is still currently threatening to veto this bill. He thinks that it'll promote teens using the drug and other people using the drug recreationally. There's no evidence to back that up whatsoever, but he's very nervous. Contact Governor Lynch if you have not yet. It is, I believe it's 603-271-2121, or log on to freemindstv.com and you can get all the contact info there. He really needs to hear from Granite Staters saying legalize this drug. Over 70% of New Hampshire residents support it, as well as the New Hampshire House and Senate. Lynch, you'd be a fool not to sign this bill into law. Anyways, we do have to move on. Speaking of New Hampshire, I wanted to talk about a quick bill here that it is currently in committee, but if it comes to light and passes, it will be some great news for freedom fighters here in New Hampshire. House Bill 3121, otherwise known as police transparency, is an act permitting a person to record a law enforcement officer in the course of such officer's official duties. Sponsored by Representative Joel Winters and Representative Nord, as well as a few other reps, the bill would allow citizens to take their cameras to the streets and record police officers. Now, I know a lot of you out there are saying, what? They can't do this already? Well, currently under New Hampshire law, you're allowed to videotape police officers, but you need their consent in order to audio record them. So you're out there, you're videotaping the police, you're audio recording them, even if it's on public land, you can be arrested for wiretapping charges, which I believe is still a felony in New Hampshire. So this would mean a whole lot, not only for people out there doing the cop watch where they're going out and recording police officers, but also if you ever have an altercation with a police officer and he tells you to shut off the camera, well, HB 312 would tell you would be able to tell the police officer, no, there's a law that permits me to do so.
Yep, I mean, I would be quick to point out that it's not just police officers that you're incapable of audio recording. My understanding of the law is anybody that is audio recorded without their permission can go after you on this, and it is a pretty serious charge. But people who are supposedly public servants, anybody who's working for the government in a supposedly public office, should be accountable for what they're doing on the clock when they're on duty. So it makes sense to me.
What do they have to hide, though? Why are they campaigning against this bill? Why do the police officers out there think that they shouldn't be recorded? Why are they under the belief that they're allowed to record all of your conversations, but they're protected from the exact same thing? I mean, if they're doing their official duty, they'd want all the evidence possible. They would want you to be recording them so that they can use that videotape in trial, possibly. But they must have something to hide, because of a lot of them, well, they really don't like it. And that's not all of them. There's some officers out there who are perfectly comfortable being videotaped. It's the ones who don't want you videotaping, though, that you really want to get on camera, because they're the ones to worry about.
Yeah, I would generally agree, and police can film you anytime they want. They can take audio recordings, and pretty much every time you're pulled over these days, you are being recorded, because almost all the police cruisers are equipped with dash cams. They might be shut off, but most of the time, if you're dealing with a police officer, whether it's a traffic stop or another situation, they are recording you. It seems only fair that you can turn around and record them too.
Right. I know that there have been a lot of people who have been ordered to shut off their cameras, not only here in New Hampshire, but around the country. I think it's high time, on the job, on the record. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. All right, let's move on a little bit. I wanted to concentrate on a little bit of local news here in the end of the show, give people an update on Sam Dodson, or Sam Miller, whichever you want to call him, or Sam Doe, as he's being currently held in Cheshire County Jail here under the name Doe, because he's refusing to give his full legal name, and he is currently held behind bars indefinitely until he's willing to give his legal name. So far, the courts have rejected his writs of habeas corpus, and they're just going to be holding him there. He's currently on hunger strike. He's been on for over 5 weeks now. He's lost a number of pounds. The Keene Sentinel, our local paper, actually gave him some nice press coverage last Sunday on the front page of the paper, but it's still not hitting national news yet. So if you're out there and you've been focusing on Sam's case, maybe email some of the more major newspapers out there, tell them about the case, and get more people involved, because there is currently a man being held behind bars indefinitely without a trial for refusing to give his legal name. Now, don't you have the right to remain silent? Well, I guess not in Cheshire County. I also wanted to update people on some of the other activists who are arrested the same day that Sam was. On April the 13th, not only Sam, but 6 other activists were arrested for refusing to leave the court lobby and sitting there peacefully. One of them was arraigned in Keene District Court just today, on the day we're recording this. While there's not much to report on that, it should be noted that not a single person in the court stood for Judge Burke when he entered the courtroom. Even though the all-rise order was given, and Judge Burke has threatened to arrest people for not standing when he enters the courtroom, show him the respect that he believes he is due. All the liberty activists there stayed seated, and when others filtered into the court partway through the trial, and they were all ordered again to stand, to leave the room, not only the liberty activists, but everybody else in the court refused to stand for Judge Burke as well. So little bit of humorous peer pressure going on. I don't know. I think it's more like the peer pressure of everyone standing is what makes people stand before.
Generally, that's
But
true.
if they see people, well, I'm allowed to sit here. Well, why do I want to stand? This guy's just going to be slamming his gavel, giving me a fine, and maybe throwing me behind bars. Why do I want to stand for this crook?
You have to show up or you go to jail. Whether you stand or not, it seems like you can make that determination.
Of course, he could be laying disorderly conduct charges down on people as he's threatened to do, but I don't think he wants to get into that. He's seen that the more
what's he gonna
people...
do, book everybody in the courtroom?
That would have been over 10 people that he would have had to book, and he booked 6 on the April 13th date. I think what he's seen is every time he books one person, then he has to book 3 more people, and then 6 more people, and then 10 more people, and then what's it going to turn into? And every single person, every single liberty activist that enters his courtroom, well, they kind of embarrass him in a certain sense because he looks like such a fool when the videotapes come out dictating these orders. And it's, you know, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult position to be in, but the reason that people aren't standing for him is largely because he has, at the very least, overreacted in a couple of high-profile situations in the courtroom. And I don't think people in general, whether you're a liberty activist or not, like it when a judge or anybody else just overreacts and is scornful just to be scornful.
Well, yeah, respect is a two-way street. And I think that people will find that most people are respectful when they're being respected. And Judge Burke was previously very respectful of liberty activists. So far, down the line, though, he's been very disrespectful, so he's getting it back in a certain sense of, well, you got to earn people's respect to get respect. You can always order people around and threaten them with a jail cell, but you know what? You can't always win their respect that way. Eventually, the people will see through the facade that you are, and, well, you know what happens next. Anyways, I'm still a small government kind of guy. I know that we report on all these anarchists out there, but Nick and I are still minarchists out there. We think there's some need for a small contingent of government, so I did just want to throw that point out there. But we definitely do support the liberty activism that's going on, because not only does it bring us closer to less government, but you know what? It also sheds a lot of light on the cause of liberty activism. So whatever it is, as long as we're moving further away from big government, I'm all for it.
Me too.
All right, well, we're out of time. I'm sure we've enraged a lot of you and brought a lot of other people on our side. If you want to contact us, fmtv@freemindstv.com is the email address. freemindstv.com is the web address where you can get all the archives of the shows, ways to help the show, and a whole lot more. It's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a great night. Free Minds TV is brought to you in part by anarchyinyourhead.com, a comic about freedom. When it comes to politics, they hate just about everyone, so they're bound to make fun of someone that you don't like eventually. anarchyinyourhead.com, that's anarchyinyourhead.com.